We're in a series right now called Challenge Accepted. And what this series is about is the challenge. Basically, it's about the challenges that we face every day in life. We can't avoid challenges, they come. Life can be challenging, life can be hard. Tragedy comes. We experience really tough stuff in our life. And, church, I hope to be a place that is happy and that leaves you happy and leaves you encouraged and it leaves you full of joy. And we're going to get there today. But first, I just want to acknowledge that, we go through hard stuff. And as we talk about going through hard things, everything that we say, A, is coming from the Bible, but B, it's to try and lead you to a place of healing or lead you to a place of joy or maturity or something like that. So this series, we're addressing 3 hard challenges. And the first challenge that we looked at last week was that the first challenge is to accept that challenges, tests, and trials are a necessary part of what you need to grow and become all that you can be. So it's something necessary for you. I wish that we could grow. And I think about the old oak tree analogy or metaphor that, the pine trees in pinelands, when the wind blows, what happens to them? They fall down, right? They hit the ground because their roots are at the surface of the ground. But when you look at something like an oak tree or a maple that's on a hill, that's in the wind, those roots grow deep, deep, deep in the ground, but it's the adversity of the environment that anchors those roots in the ground, and that tree can withstand the wind and the rain and the storms that come its way. It's like we need hard stuff in our life. It's necessary for us. And as we talked about that, we looked at the book of James, and we're going to be in the book of James this week and again next week. And we looked at this verse in James here in chapter 1, verse 2, and it says, and this kind of creates a problem within us here. But the second verse in James 1 is, consider it nothing but joy. Consider it nothing but joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you fall into various trials. Consider it nothing but joy. So you're telling me that we're supposed to feel joy when we go through hardships and we go through trials? You're telling me that if I'm to be mature and complete, then I need to feel joy here when this happens? I just want to say up front, no, that's not what we're saying. That James isn't even talking about an emotion of joy. He's not saying that you should, it's like, skippy dippy, God's doing hard stuff in my life, can't wait to see what happens. It's going to be amazing and great stuff. That's not what James is talking about. What James is talking about is more of like a mental and a cognitive state. That's why he uses this word here, consider. That word consider, it's, okay, so when you go out to eat, I use this example on Thursday night in our men's group. When you go out to eat, before you go out to eat on a Friday or Saturday night, it's just been payday and people are going out and they've got some money to burn. When you do that, you are thinking about the different options, right? This is not complicated here. You're thinking about different options. You're thinking about where can I get if you're like me, where can I get the most food for the least amount of money? Or you're thinking, where am I going to have the best environment? What's going to be the best, most conducive environment for me? I want something quiet, so we don't want to go there. We want to go there. But just in figuring out what you're going to wear on Sunday morning, ladies and men, I guess, did you stand with your outfits and did you consider, does this make me look fat? Does this make my muscles look big? Do I look cool in this? Do I look better in that? That's what it is to consider. It's to weigh things out, weigh out the options. It's to look at the different possibilities. It's to look at the different outcomes based on what you choose. And that's exactly what James is telling you here. He's saying, guys, listen, can you weigh out the possibilities and the outcomes? Can you weigh out the options? Can you weigh out the impacts? And if you can weigh that out, if you can consider your trials and the hard things that you're going through, then maybe you would be able to consider that there is something joy-worthy that can come out of your trials and out of your various trials and sufferings. James is saying to take a cognitive step away from our emotions. We're going to talk about our emotions today. Anybody married to an emotional person? Don't raise your hands. The only hand that goes up. The only hand that goes up. I'm emotional. I am. Yeah. That's not where I thought this would go there at the beginning. Yeah, we're going to talk about our emotions and how our emotions lead us down a wrong path today. But again, I want to address, I think this verse creates a problem for us. And the problem for us is that we struggle with the consider part. That's where we struggle. That's where the gap is. Because we can hear all the stuff, and if you weren't here last Sunday, please go back and watch that. It's actually, we have a YouTube channel. We have 2 videos on that channel, Mother's Day. And then I decided not to put the video up of the sound guys walking around. And so we have 2 videos, Mother's Day and then last Sunday, and we're posting those regularly on Sunday afternoons or Mondays whenever I can get to it. But watch that. And when you watch that, when you look at that, you can see that this consider part is a problem. And even after hearing all the good things, so James is saying, why is it that you should consider something joy? Why? Well, and then he gives a whole list. He says, well, because God wants to make you mature. He wants to make you complete. God wants to build spiritual maturity in you. He wants to build your resilience. It's like we know that hard times are going to come, and we know that struggles are going to happen. We're not going to avoid those things. Well, they're going to keep coming. And so James is saying, if they're going to keep coming, then I want to make you better for it. And God is saying, I have a plan to make you. It's like God is saying, I want to make you better at life so that the problem you face now prepares you for the problem that you're going to face tomorrow. But this part, this consider part, is still so hard. It's like there's a leap. Anyone seen Indiana Jones? No Indiana Jones fan. Okay. Well, I'll talk to the 3 of you. There's a part in Indiana Jones where he has to step out and walk on what's like an invisible bridge. You know, and that's what this consider struggle is. We're on a ledge and we see death and we see pain, we see suffering. And on the other side of this is God and what God has for you, a mature faith. Completeness, inner peace. That's one of the promises, inner peace. But we just can't get ourselves to take a step towards that because we can't get over this part, the consider part. And I just want to let you know that even before we go into this, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to live this out in my life. I'm not going to tell you my whole story, but there was a season in my life where I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, clinically diagnosed with panic disorder, unable to function in life. And depression took me and I couldn't get myself back from it. And I was suicidal, and it was a horrible, horrible, hard season of life. And going through that season, I declared to my wife, but I just said listen, this wasn't like a month where something bad happened. This is like a clinical issue that's been going on my whole life. And after the end of 3 years of having multiple major depressive breakdowns, which statistically I shouldn't even be alive. After you have 1, your statistics for living and not committing suicide go down. After you have 2, after you have 3, you become an anomaly. And I'm one of those anomalies. And it was after going through a 3-year season of that, lots of days laying on the floor begging God for relief, lots of days asking for a way out, but it never came. And then going through and coming, kind of starting to come out on the other side, so I'm your pastor, but I even denounced God. I told Casey, I said, it's easier for me to choose that God's not real and accept my situation than it is to accept that God is real and try and make sense of what I'm going through. And so I denied God. And there wasn't some like magic moment where, all of a sudden I was healed and everything was fine. It was a long, slow road. But what I learned from that is a couple things. One, I learned that even when I denounced God, God didn't leave me because He's just that good. Because I'm His. I'm loved, I'm accepted, I'm forgiven, and I'm His. God didn't leave me, not once. I also learned through going that God was doing something in me, that He did a work to help mature me and to complete me. And then about 1.5 years ago, some of you guys know part of the story, but I went through another really, really hard time. And it felt as painful as one of the times before. And it was really difficult. It was soul-shattering. It was soul-shattering for our whole family. But because I didn't have a problem with this part, I was able to walk through it gracefully. And because I didn't have a problem with the consider part because of what I had gone through before. See, it's when we go through these trials, and especially the ones that we absolutely cannot reconcile. We cannot understand why. We can't understand why God isn't changing us. We can't understand why the relief is not coming. When we go through those, you are going through one of the most important seasons of your life that you could go through. Because if I could take my life, all the shaping seasons in my life, and stack them up next to each other, the one season that I would not get rid of was that 3-year period of breakdown after breakdown after breakdown, of denouncing God and going through that and seeing that God never left me. I wouldn't get rid of that. Now, when I look back on that in hindsight, I do consider it joy. I do. I consider it joy that I went through that. And when we were going through a hard season about 1.5 years ago, I considered it joy. Because God was doing another work in us. We had an opportunity for God to continue to grow us and mature us. So we just have to get through this consider part. And I would encourage you, and hopefully you'll be able to do this at the end of this series, that you'll be able to take that Indiana Jones style step of faith. It'll never probably make sense to you. But that's not the promise. The promise is that God is there and He's working and He's doing something in your life. God doesn't bring on these hardships in us. I mean, maybe in some of us He does, but I don't think that God sat down and said, I'm going to make Chris almost take his own life. I think God sat down and said, I'm so broken for this broken son of mine, and I'm not going to leave his side. So James gives us this promise here, and James knows that we're going to struggle with this consider part. He knows we will. And so what James gives us in verse 5, which is after the list, verses 1 through 4, is verse 1's a greeting. James is like, hey, this is who I am. And verse 2 is where James says, hey, consider it joy. And then in verse 3 and 4, he's saying, here's why you could consider it joy, because God's doing all this stuff in your life. And then in verse 5, because he knows that we will struggle with the consider part. In verse 5, James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, if you lack wisdom, okay, why do we need this wisdom? To guide him through decisions or circumstances. So James is saying, if any of you are struggling with the consider part, then you may be lacking wisdom. You may be lacking, and I'm not saying that you're lacking smarts or intelligence or the ability to deal with hard stuff. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this wisdom from God here. And James is saying, if any of you lacks that wisdom to guide him through a decision or circumstance, he is to ask of our benevolent. You know what benevolent means? It's good and generous, loving. It's over the top good. You are to ask our benevolent God, who gives to everyone generously and without rebuke or blame, and it will be given to him. So what do we do when we struggle with the consider problem? And we're going to talk about this consider problem a lot. So what do we do when we struggle with that problem to consider? Well, when we're struggling to walk that step of faith to consider, then we need wisdom. Go back one for me, Kyle. We're struggling because we're lacking wisdom. But James gives this promise here. This is a promise for you, a promise for me, and there's no secret code to getting it. James says the promise is that he is to ask of our benevolent God who gives to everyone. Who's everyone? Everyone. It's all of us. It's not who gives to everyone as long as they cross their legs and sit on the ground and pray for 3 hours. And it's not to give to everyone who reads their Bible every single day for 30 minutes or an hour every day. It's not to give to everyone except those that sinned or did something wrong. You know, it's not everyone in an economic bracket. It's not everyone in a racial bracket. It's everyone. And he gives it generously. And then he does it without rebuke. Don't you love when people give you advice and then call you stupid on the end of it? You know, they're like, hey, I need some help here. Well, dummy, this is what you should do. No, God doesn't do it He does it without any rebuke or blame. And it will be given to Him. That's our promise. But here's the thing. We don't pray this way when we go through trials and sufferings. We don't. Our default is not to say, okay, God, hard times are coming. Can you give me a little bit of wisdom? That's not our default. That's not the way that we pray. And we don't pray that way because we don't want wisdom or a different perspective. We want relief. That's what we want. We want relief from what we're going through, not wisdom. We want relief. And in fact, we're not even looking for wisdom. We're looking for a way out. We want out of this thing. God, take me out of this. Get me out of this as quickly as you can, as fast as possible. I think back in those 3 years, all those prayers that I prayed to God, all the scripture that I memorized, all the stuff that I was doing, everything was backed, or everything led to God, give me relief. God, get me out of this situation. God, I need a way out. And if you're not going to give me a way out, then I'm going to find my own way out. But God, I need relief. That's our prayers. That's like our human nature, because we don't like pain. We don't like to struggle. But we're missing out on that promise. Missing out on the promise that James gives us, that He will give you some wisdom. And I'm going to talk about what this wisdom is and the difference between good wisdom and bad wisdom. But one more truth about us is that we're always looking for the shortest route of escape that leads to the easiest promise of comfort. That's what we're looking for. When you're in your struggle, you're in your trials, whether they're hard, whether it's a boss that's bearing down on you, whether it's pressure at home with family, or whether it's a sin you just can't kick, or whether it's a death, a loss, a sickness, but a tragedy, a true tragedy in your life. And whatever it is, our prayers go towards, God, get me out. God, give me relief. Because we're always looking for the shortest route of escape that leads to the easiest promise of comfort. And I wish God worked this way. But what I can say in my life, the reason I shared part of my story with you is almost to give me some street cred here, so you guys don't think that this privileged guy up front is telling everybody to, suck it up and live the hard life here while, our biggest struggle is living in Pinelands. That it's like I wanted you to know that I can identify with you. I wanted you to know that I've been there. I haven't been where you've been, but I've been to a similar place, maybe, possibly. And I've experienced those dark nights and those hard nights. I've experienced the prayers of, God, give me relief. God, help me out of this. I've asked God, what's the shortest route of escape that's going to lead me to the easiest promise? But if we stay there and we never leave that place, then something begins to happen in your heart. And this thing that starts to happen in your heart builds and it builds and it builds, and it starts to shape who you are. In fact, if we never stop looking for relief or a way out, we will build up a life of resentment and bitterness. We'll resent God for our circumstances. We'll resent other people that they're not going through. Have you ever looked at somebody and been like, they're a horrible person, and yet their life is fine? God, I'm over here trying to do the right thing, and my life is falling apart. And it builds this resentment towards others, and this resentment towards God. And then with resentment comes bitterness, and then we get bitter about life. And then this resentment and this bitterness, it begins to leak out, and it impacts our relationships, and it impacts our work and our lives. It impacts our own health. This is kind of a danger zone for us. It's a real danger zone that if we're in, we want to get out of. But we don't want to stay in this danger zone. So today I want to try and help us to not stay in that danger zone. I want to help show you that there is another pathway that you can take. I don't want to overpromise it. I don't want to say that it's magical and you'll pray for wisdom and all your struggles will go away. Listen, I'm not here to make sense of your struggle. I'm not here to make sense of your hardship. I'm not here to promise that it will go away or that it will change, or to promise that there's not another one coming right after it. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to show a truth that's in God's Word that I've seen work in my life, and I've had work in my life, and I've seen it work in other people's lives. And with that truth, I hope to prepare you and equip you to be able to go through tough things better. It's like we want to make you better at life. And when you introduce God and His truths and His promises into life, then you become better at life. You know, that second hard season I went through a year and a half ago was like, it's funny, hindsight looking at it, I'm like, oh, that was a cakewalk. It wasn't a cakewalk. It didn't feel like a cakewalk. It felt like my whole world was exposed and ripped out. My heart was being stepped on and nobody loved us and everyone hated us. And it was a really, really tough season. But looking back on it, I'm like, oh, man, that was so much easier. Why was it so much easier? Well, because I'd taken care of this resentment and bitterness. I'd gotten through that other trial and that other suffering. So the book of James is broken down like this. Okay, we're going to move forward into James's discussion on wisdom. James chapter 1 is like an introduction of the whole book, which is 5 chapters. If you're looking for an easy book to read, well, it's a very challenging book, but it's short. You know, if you want to feel accomplished, you read James, you read 1 Peter, you read 2 Peter. You find Titus, Timothy, you find all the short ones and you're like, I've read 7 books of the Bible, in the last week. Look at me. But the rest of James, chapters 2 through 5, what that's about is there's 12 like many but very challenging teachings on wisdom. And we're going to look at one of the 12 of those teachings that James gives on wisdom. So here's James's kind of approach to wisdom. We're going to look at how he addresses people in his letter here. He's addressing a group of people, like a church. He says this in James chapter 3 here. He says in verse 13, "Who among you is wise and intelligent?" So he's literally saying, don't overthink the Bible sometimes. Hey, if you think you're wise and intelligent, raise your hand. Don't do that here, but if you think you're wise and intelligent, raise your hand. He's like, who among you is that? Is that right? Raise your hand. And then he goes on to kind of clarify some things here, because what James is wanting to do in this verse is to qualify what true wisdom is. Because before we get started on good wisdom, bad wisdom, he's wanting to qualify it. And so he says in the rest of the verse, he says, let him by his good conduct show his good deeds with the gentleness and humility of true wisdom. James is saying that if you have God's true wisdom, then there will be evidence of it in your life. That we will be able to see that there's something different about you. He's basically saying, hey, don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Like, don't just talk about this thing. Don't just say you have wisdom, but now you need to actually walk the walk. And that process that James is saying here is like, if you have God's wisdom, you will show evidence of it in your life. It's not, I used to always struggle with this verse here and think to myself, like, am I showing evidence? Am I showing evidence? It's like, you don't actually have to worry about showing the evidence. The only thing you have to worry about is getting the wisdom from God. Because as James says, it's not just talk the talk, but it's also walk the walk here. And James goes on in the next verse here, and this is where, now that he's kind of qualified what wisdom is, and he's kind of taken some pressure off of you, to instead of walking around every day or all day and thinking, okay, is there evidence? Who's judging the evidence? It's like when God does things in your heart, there's an overflow of God in your life. And that overflow of God in your life becomes the thing that people see. That's the evidence there. So you just have to worry about you and God, not exactly the evidence. But James now said, okay, for the rest of us. So if you have wisdom, raise your hand. Let me qualify what wisdom is. Now for the rest of us. So this is for all of us, including me. James says, if you have wisdom, great. But, I love when I see the word but in the Bible, because it's like there's a big shift right here. It's like, if you've got the wisdom, then great. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart. So now he's speaking to all of us. He's speaking to the rest of us. If you've got bitter jealousy, if you've got selfish ambition in your heart here, this bitter jealousy that he's talking about, it's not so much it's like, think about it like, I'm upset that my life is going the way it's going. And I wish that my life wasn't going this way. It's like a very subtle kind of jealousy that he's speaking of here. And so when we look at God and we say, God, why me? Why not them? Why my family? Why my life? Why have I been dealt this hand of cards? Why not somebody else? Why did it have to happen to us? And that becomes this bitter jealousy of, God, I wish that my life looked different. God, I wish that my circumstances were different. God, I wish that you would bless me like I've seen you bless other people. And you're not. And so you start to become bitter over that. And then you get this sort of selfish ambition that starts to develop in your heart. And let me just tell you that selfish ambition is that is driven by your pain. It's driven by the pain that you carry, the pain from these hardships and these trials. And it fills you with pain, and then it combines with this bitter jealousy here. And what makes this so selfish, he's saying that you have selfish ambition in your heart, is that pain is selfish. The pain that you go through is selfish because it causes us to become self-focused. So if you stub your toe here, and Kyle, you can put that slide up there for us. If you stub your toe, the three greatest pains in life are, oh goodness, I had a really good example of this right here. Go ahead, I remember it. Sorry, thanks for letting me work that out. Appreciate it, guys. Three greatest pains in life: a broken heart, a stubbed toe, and a smashed thumb. Right?
Childbirth?
Huh? No. No, doesn't count. So, sorry, my wife's asking about childbirth, and I said, no, it's not. It would defeat the purpose of the sermon. When you go through, when you smash a finger or you stub a toe, that's all that you can think about. You know, how many parents have put their kids to sleep and they've finally gone to sleep and you turn around to leave the room and you just kick the door or kick a dresser or kick a toy or step on a Lego or something? That's real pain. That's real. That's real pain. But when you go through those things, you stub a toe, you smash a finger, it's all you can think about. It consumes you. And it kind of should, because pain is a thing that its whole purpose is to bring focus to something. You know, you've smashed your finger, you feel pain, your body is telling you there's something wrong here, you need to address it. You know, that's why childbirth doesn't work in this example. You know, fair enough there. But pain is a version of focus, and it focuses you. And that's the problem with the pain that we struggle with. That's why we don't go to God and say, God, I need wisdom. We go to God and we say, God, I need relief. God, I need a way out because this hurts. And my body is telling me I need to get rid of this hurt. I need to take care of this pain that's in my heart. I need it to be gone. I need it to go. And we ask Him that over and over and over again because its pain is sharp and it hurts and it consumes everything. And then it becomes the lens that we look through. We see everything through our pain. We see every opportunity. We see every relationship, everything. We filter it through our pain. And so James is talking to those of us that have let that happen. And he continues to say in verse 14 here, he says, pain. He says, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, he's not saying like, hey, if you're a horrible human being. He's saying, hey, you may have gone through some hurt. You may have gone through some pain. You may be in some pain. And because of that, you may have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart. And now he wants to give you some advice, and he says, and don't be arrogant, and as a result, be in defiance of the truth. So this is just a little like sidebar of advice. He says, don't be in defiance of the truth here. We when we're going through pain, do we want the truth? No, we want relief. When we're going through pain, our truth is the truth that we want. And this truth that James is talking about the truth of God. But we want relief. And this arrogance that James is saying, he said, hey, don't be arrogant. He's saying, you know, don't put don't take all that you feel, all the pain and hurt and suffering and the hardship that you feel and the beat down that you feel, and put that on other people. Because pain is something that can make us feel that. And this arrogance that he's talking about, there's a subtle expression of pride here, because it's kind of a version of pride. And so this subtle expression of pride, Kyle, you can put that on the screen for us, is that we elevate our feelings above everything else. And this is where we talk about our feelings. We elevate those above everything else. That's this arrogance that James is talking about. We put our feelings up there, you know? And then we become guided by our feelings. But the problem with that is that your emotions are good indicators, but they are terrible dictators. Your emotions do a great job at indicating that you have a problem and that you need some help and that you need healing, you need relief, something like that. But they are not good when they become dictators of your life. When our emotions begin to dictate our life, we become people that we wouldn't have thought that we would become. When our emotions are dictating everything, then your emotions then almost become kind of like a kind of wisdom that you listen to. You know, if wisdom is something that you listen to that guides you and that takes you somewhere and that gets you through different areas of life, well, your emotions can become a wisdom. And when you put your emotions above everything else and you allow your emotions to be dictators of what you do and how you respond, then you're letting your emotions be like a wisdom. And so then when you encounter an issue or a problem, your emotion, it peaks up and it says, you were hurt by this before, don't do that. You let that person in and they burned you. Don't let this next person in. Don't trust them. Don't trust that church. Don't trust that pastor. You know, I've been hurt by church, and so, hey, I am not going through that again. You know, your emotions become a wisdom. Your emotions begin to dictate everything that you do, everything you experience, everything that you don't do. And that is another danger zone for us. Emotions are good indicators, but they are terrible, terrible dictators. You know, James goes on in verse 15 here. Now what he's going to do is he's going to take this emotion that we've let dictate our lives, and he's going to talk about the consequences of that emotion in our lives. He says in verse 15, this superficial wisdom is not that which comes from above. Why does he call it superficial? Well, superficial is something that's just surface level. It's like a cheap veneer on top of particle board or plywood. It's just right there, and it's just this thin. And that's what that's what the wisdom of emotion is like. Because it's just this thin. It's not actually addressing the root. In fact, it'll keep you from ever addressing the root problem that's in your heart. And so he calls it a superficial wisdom. And he says you need to understand that this is not that which comes down from above. It's not coming from God. It's coming from you. And you need to separate the two out. Because there could be wisdom from God, but this is coming from you. If you wonder why you break every relationship, if you wonder why you can't keep friends, if you wonder why you struggle with authority and with your jobs and things like that, well, there may be an emotional wisdom at play in your life. And it's probably fueled by past hurts and tough things that you've gone through. And that is probably fueled by, I don't want to go through that again. I just want relief and I just want a way out. James goes on to call it earthly, secular. You can go back one, Kyle. He goes on to call it earthly and secular because it's not godly. It's earthly. He calls it natural or unspiritual because, again, it's making a difference between your emotional wisdom and a godly wisdom. And he even calls it demonic. You know, this word demonic, I'm not saying that you are a demonic person because you're letting your wisdom, your emotional wisdom, guide you and walk you through situations in your life. I'm not calling you demonic. I'm not even calling your emotions demonic. But you will, if your emotions are leading you, you will go to places that you would have never gone. You will act in ways that you would have never acted. You will say things that you would have never said. You will display anger in a way that you would have never displayed anger. And you will justify yourself in doing that because your emotions are your wisdom. And they're guiding you to a place that you should never go. They're guiding you to act in ways that you never thought that you would act. And what this means here is when you're in a situation and you feel this emotional wisdom rise up in you to guide you, to lead you down what would be a wrong path, there's this little thing on your shoulder here because we fight a spiritual battle. There is a spiritual thing going on in your lives. There's God, there's the Holy Spirit, and He is the conqueror of all, but there's also the devil. And let me just remind all of us that the devil doesn't want any of you to be happy. The devil doesn't want any of your relationships to heal. The devil wants to keep you beaten down. And this demonic thing right here, just imagine this little thing on your shoulder saying, yeah, say that. Yeah, throw that. Yeah, do that. Yeah, just take that because you deserve it. Because, look what you've gone through. You just deserve that. Take that. Have you been in an argument and you think about the worst thing that you can say to somebody? And you think, I probably shouldn't say that. And then you say it anyway. It's because there's that little voice right there going, it'll feel good if you say it. It'll feel good if you destroy that person. It'll feel good if you send that Facebook message or post or tweet or whatever it is. It's going to feel good. So do that. That is not from God. That is coming from the devil. And it doesn't mean that you're possessed. I don't want anyone walking out of here thinking, am I possessed by the devil? I'm not calling you possessed or anything like that. But I think that we've all heard that little voice in us that said, yeah, do that thing. Yeah, take that. Say that. Treat them this way. You deserve it. They don't deserve it. Well, that's not coming from God. And so James is saying that this emotional-led wisdom is not from God. And then remember, he's talking to us that have have jealousy, bitter jealousy, and selfish ambition in us. And he goes on to say in verse 16, he says, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder." That it leads to a place where your life is a mess. There's disorder in the world when you're being guided by your emotions purely. This is part of the problem with, hey, everyone should just go follow their own heart. You can't tell me how to feel. I feel however I want to feel. I'm just going to follow my heart. And I hope that you all just, everybody follows their own heart. If we all only followed our own hearts, this would be a disaster of a society. Because when your emotions are your wisdom, it leads you to places that lead you to disorder. It's unrest, it's rebellion, and it's every evil thing, a morally degrading practice. There are things that we do because we don't have healing in our heart and we're listening to our emotions. Where I see this play out in my life and in lots of other lives, probably in yours as well, is there's an empty place in your heart and it's empty and you feel like you need to fill it. You feel like you need something. And so you turn to things. You turn to things that you shouldn't turn to. And you try and fill that with satisfaction. And that's something that you wouldn't feel. Maybe you turn to other people, toxic relationships. Maybe you turn to substances or bad practices. But that's what this morally degrading practice is. It's stuff that doesn't build you up, but it continues to tear you down. The truth behind this is that your emotions will betray you and lead you to do things that you otherwise would never do. And now James is going to go into the good kind of wisdom here. And this good wisdom that he wants to talk about is we find in verse 17 here. So he says, here's the contrast to all of that. And the contrast is that, but the wisdom from above is first pure and morally and spiritually undefiled. It's pure. You know what this pure wisdom means? It's objective. It's not wrapped up in your emotions. So hopefully, if you look at James's letter, I think what James is saying is, hopefully you've heard these things that have woken you up to the fact that your emotions could be leading you down a pathway that you never thought you would go or that you would want to go. Hopefully you see that now. And if you see that now, and if you can see in your life that, hey, maybe I've been letting myself be emotionally driven as I deal with my pain and as I deal with my suffering, maybe I've been letting my emotions guide me, and I can see, yeah, it does lead me to disorder. It does lead me to immoral behavior. It does lead me to say things that I shouldn't say. It does lead me there, and it's not a great place to be. And I'm not that happy here. And if you can see that, and James is saying, okay, now maybe if you can see that, let me then tell you about the wisdom from God and the difference in that. And the first thing he says is it's pure. Here's what I want to say about that. It's objective. It's not clouded with your emotions. What do we do when we go to somebody for advice? We get hurt by somebody And this feels good, right? It feels good to go to like your buddy and be like, hey, Steve, man, I need some advice on this here. This person, they burned me. They were mean to me. They were rude to me. What can I do in this situation? And then the next thing we do is we try and create our emotional cloud over them, because we want to make sure they give us advice that benefits us. So we often don't go to somebody and say, hey, Casey, I just need some advice here. I've got this hard thing in my life. What do you think about that? And then stop and close our lips and then let them speak into our life, because we want to make sure that they say the right thing, and that thing that they're saying is being led by the emotions that we feel. But God's not that way. God's objective, and God's wisdom is objective. That means it's not polluted with our emotions. It's not polluted with our hurt and our pain. It is based on one true source. That's God. It's Jesus, the Holy Spirit, His Word. And it doesn't change based on your emotions. It stays objective. And that's why it's pure, because this wisdom from above is nothing but God. Now, it may not meet you in your situation. It may not feel good like, your good mate would do. When we go to advice, we're often looking for justification. We're not looking for wisdom. But God won't give us that because He's pure. And so then He goes on to say more about this wisdom from above. He says it's peace-loving, it's courteous, it's considerate, it's gentle, it's reasonable and willing to listen. It's full of compassion and good fruits, and it's unwavering, without self-righteous hypocrisy and self-serving guile. That's amazing. That's the kind of wisdom that I want. Wisdom that will listen to me, that's full of compassion and good fruit. That's the good stuff. But there's only one place you get that. You get that from God, which goes back to James 1 verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask for it, and it'll be given to you. But see, these things here don't naturally come. They don't come to us naturally. But this is what the wisdom of heaven leads us towards. It doesn't come naturally to us to seek these things out or to feel like we need these things. But it is what the wisdom of heaven will lead you towards. It'll lead you towards a life of gentle reasonability, towards a life of compassion, unwavering, without self-righteous hypocrisy. That's where that leads. God has this amazing plan for us. And He's so gracious in that He doesn't want to leave us in our pain. But we have a couple challenges. We said at the beginning, the first challenge was to accept that trials are necessary. And now we've been presented with good wisdom and bad wisdom here. And good wisdom is of God. It's objective. It's pure. And the other wisdom comes from our own emotions. But our emotions lead us into a bad place. And that brings us to the second truth. Kyle, there should be a slide for the second challenge for us here. That second challenge is to accept that there might be things within you that need to change before things around you will change. First, it's to accept that trials may be necessary. Now it's to accept that the change that needs to happen in you first is in you before it is around you. I go back to when I was praying for those 3 years, laying in the bathroom floor, laying on my office floor, desperate for God. God, can you get me out of here? God, can you give me relief? God, can you remove this from me? God, can you change what's happening out there so that I in here can be better and feel better? And that's not in alignment with this challenge. So a question you can ask yourself is, have you asked God what needs to be changed in you versus what needs to be changed around you? For some of us, this may be the first time you ever asked that. And it can feel like frustrating, like, Chris, you don't know my trial, you don't know my suffering. How dare you think that there's something wrong with me? I'm fine. But I'm dealing with a broken world and horrible people out there. That's the problem out there. The problem is not here. Well, there is a problem out there, but there is a work in here that God wants to do in you. And the pathway through your trial, this pathway that we take through your trial or challenge might be changing something in you rather than the things that are around you. That might be what it is. I want to just give you an example out of a cave, and then I've got a very short toolkit for you. It's called a looking inward toolkit for you here. And so if you think about the hardships and the suffering that you've gone through, I know that, I can really relate to this because I felt like I was in a cave, right? And a cave is a dark place, and there's one way in, one way out. And we feel like these challenges, these hardships are taking us into this cave deeper and deeper and deeper and darker and darker. And it gets scary in there. And we don't see that there's a way out. And then we start asking God, can you take the cave away? Can you remove the cave? Can you get me out of this cave? Can you give me relief? Can you change my situation? Can you let me escape from out of this cave? And when you leave a cave, you go out the same way that you go in. And the interesting thing and kind of the good thing for us is that caves and tunnels, they look the same from one side. It's a big dark black hole into something that you can't see all the way through. And what God is saying through this, what James is trying to challenge us with this, is that sometimes accepting that something in me needs to change first. It's you're actually not in a cave. You're actually going through a tunnel. And God doesn't want to take you out the same way that you came in. God wants to lead you through, changed on the other side. But what we have to do is we just have to keep going. We have to keep struggling with our considerate problem. We've got to keep just putting one foot in front of the other here. And we just have to keep going. And so I want to give you 3 things that you can do to try and help yourself. And this will take 2 minutes max here, because I know we're over on time. So I've got this looking inward toolkit for you here. The first thing here is you identify why you need comfort. You identify why you need comfort. See, our desire for comfort externally is because internally we haven't experienced comfort in our hearts in a long time, which means there's some healing that needs to happen in here. And so that it's like this is where you get below the superficial and you identify the root. What is the root of the lack of comfort or the healing that you need in your heart? Then the second thing that you do is you seek healing for that. You seek healing for your hurt. And you invite people into it. You identify the root, and now you have this big nasty root, and you're probably sitting in the middle of a tunnel thinking that it's a cave, and it's wet, and it's yucky, and it's nasty, and there's scorpions and bugs and spiders everywhere. I keep thinking about Indiana Jones, where he's got to put his hand through that wall, and it's just covered in scorpions and bugs and all that stuff. And you're sitting there, now you've identified this monster that is the root of a lot of your hurt. And that's the reason why you're still experiencing the pain that you're experiencing. And now you need to actually seek healing for that. You need to go to somebody, go to a pastor, go to a friend, go to a counselor. I've been in many kinds of therapy. It's all good. There's emotional focus therapy. There's cognitive behavioral therapy. There's all kind of attachment therapy. There's all kinds of things that you can do. But do something. Seek healing for your hurt. And then number 3 is pursue healthy forms of comfort. Walk away from some of the unhealthy. Get out. Go for a walk. Exercise. But bring somebody into this. Bring a good person into your life and get pure, objective wisdom. I have 3 men in my life. And these guys helped me walk through this last really hard season that we have. And they were objective. And their wisdom was pure to the point that I hated them at times for it. But I just can't imagine going through it without having them to help me pursue healthy comfort in my life. So we identify our need, we seek healing for your hurt, and we pursue healthy forms of comfort. Now next week we're going to have a 3rd challenge. Challenge 1 is we accept that hardship is necessary to grow us. Challenge 2 is we accept there may be something in here that needs to change before something out there. And you'll have to come next week to hear challenge 3.